Hello, everyone. I will be speaking on a very strange story I just came across. So let's get started, shall we? Let's fix this. It says op-ed, how Elon Musk's plan for Twitter could threaten free speech. I would love to know how that works. As he prepares to take over Twitter, Elon Musk has said that in the name of upholding free speech, he will dial back safeguards on the platform that are there to protect against disinformation. This would be a mistake, and not just because disinformation has fueled a crisis of faith in democracy and impeded pandemic response at cost of hundreds of thousands of lives. See, this is stupid because the whole purpose of free speech is there to undermine people's faith in the democratic process. In order to keep it honest, people are allowed to question and admonish certain things that the government is doing. That's the whole point of free speech. So to say, and disinformation is also free speech. So this whole paragraph right here is stupid. But let us continue. Disinformation, though largely protected by the First Amendment, it is totally protected by the First Amendment. People have the right to lie, which is disinformation. But if it is a lie that manipulates people in a certain direction that can undermine certain things like an election, then it would be not protected. Though largely protected by the First Amendment against government control, can also imperil free speech itself. No, it cannot, because it is free speech. So that's wrong. If Musk is serious about fostering open discourse, yes, open discourse is the key right there, which also includes disinformation. You dumbass. You're pretty much arguing against yourself, and it's like you think by addressing it, you're somehow arguing a point, but you haven't. You're just stating an objection that people would have with the dumb shit that you say, and you think by stating it, you somehow addressed the point, which you didn't. Who's the idiot that wrote this? Suzanne Nosel. You're a dumbass. He needs to account for dangers that disinformation poses. No, he doesn't. This has nothing to do with free speech. If you're talking about an imperiling free speech, your first point is dumb. He needs to account for dangers that disinformation poses to expression as he takes over one of the world's most influential online platforms. No, he doesn't. He definitely doesn't. He needs to take into account what it can pose to the democratic process when it comes to elections, because if Twitter has a big influence on the election and how it's going, and how people receive information about the electoral process and the candidates, then yes, that is important. But when it comes to free speech, it is not. Wrong. How can disinformation threaten free speech? It can't, if it is a form of free speech. Exactly. I hope you answer that question, because I'm seeing this part here where it says to answer that question. That means you're not going to answer it, and you're just going to distract from it by saying a bunch of other nonsense that are somewhat related, or maybe even not even related. But you're never going to answer that question, are you? But let us see. We need to recall why we protect free speech in the first place. No, we don't. But if you're going to do it anyways, let's do it. It's not just because people like to be able to spout their opinions or because the founders thought it was important. That is exactly why. That's not the only reasons, but that is definitely why. But let us see what else you got. Free speech is protected in the Bill of Rights in the global instruments like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because free speech is not part of the universal what? Free speech is not guaranteed in other countries. What are you talking about? Free speech is protected in the Bill of Rights and in the global instruments like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. No, it's not. Free speech is not a human right. Because it has long been recognized as necessary to create open and democratic societies. Free speech was mainly a protection against tyranny. It gives the people a voice so that they can point out and speak about certain acts that the government or leadership is imposing on them against their will. Because in any tyrannical dictatorship, the first thing to go is your ability to speak on the stuff that they're doing. That is the point of free speech. It's all about avoiding tyranny. Going back to its origin in ancient Greece. What's happening here? Going back to its origin in ancient Greece, free speech has been about more than the right to have your say, but also the right to persuade. Yes, and lying allows you to persuade people, which means disinformation, which is a lie, can help you persuade people. So are you making a case for disinformation or against it? Right to persuade, to listen, and to be heard. See, no right to be truthful. You see that? You can do disinformation. It is perfectly allowed. You're making the case for disinformation. To listen, to be heard, to deliberate with fellow citizens, to seek and find the truth in democratic self-government. All right. Subsequent thinkers and Supreme Court opinions have identified other virtues of free speech as a societal safety valve that helps prevent bottled up frustrations from erupting into violence, as a catalyst for social, scientific, and economic progress, as a prerequisite for vindicating other individual liberties. Okay. Yet to answer the question, but we keep trudging on. If policies adopted in the name of free speech impair rather than advance those ends, they may not be speech friendly. How is disinformation not allowed in that? It helps persuade people. And this information can also be rebutted. So it helps the democratic process because other people can participate in it. it doesn't prevent other people from countering disinformation. So it doesn't impair free speech in any way. Just so dumb. When arenas for public discourse are flooded with disinformation, flooded. Now, are you talking about too much disinformation or just disinformation in general? Public discourse are flooded with disinformation. Free speech begins to shed its value. It doesn't. It does not. What value? You're trying to appoint morality to free speech. Morality isn't free. It's literally restrictive. Morality is restrictive and judgmental. It is not free. So free speech has no moral background. When arenas for public discourse are flooded with disinformation, free speech begins to shed its value. If audiences lose their grip on what is true and what is false, they can become primed for distrust, for distrusting everything, and it becomes impossible to sway people. Okay. Or even dissuade people even with the most compelling argument or evidence. Yes, that is happening. Have you heard about the debate about genders and what is a woman? I mean, that is happening because you have disinformation and audiences lose their grip on what is true and what is false. And they become distrustful of everything, i.e. the patriarchy or gender is a social construct, becomes impossible to persuade people or even the most compelling arguments or evidence. That's already happening, and that has nothing to do with any of this. And it's perfectly allowed in free speech, and I wouldn't want that to be restricted, even though I think it's kind of dumb. I wouldn't want it to be restricted because it's free speech. People are allowed to have their pronouns and say whatever they want and be whoever they want to be. If platforms are riddled with propaganda, yeah, there's already propaganda. What are you talking about? Bunch of propaganda in movies and films and news and commercials about the new normal and how men should behave and toxic masculinity and what women can do, and apparently which is everything, and it's everything, but they're not responsible for anything because patriarchy and like it's propaganda is all over. This what you're doing right now is propaganda. If platforms are riddled with propaganda and political falsehoods aimed to skew election results, yeah, that would be illegal. The skew election results part, that is not covered under free speech. Prospects for genuine discourse on matters of public policy or local affairs evaporate. But if you can counter the disinformation, if you can point out that people are lying and they're giving false information, then you should be able to win. You should be able to give a compelling argument as to why this is disinformation and why it's wrong and why what they're saying is not truthful. And democracy should prevail in that case. If everything that you're saying is true, right? Disinformation should only aid the democratic process because all the opposition would have to do is point out what the truth is, which should convince people because the truth should be obvious. The truth could be easily verified. No? If the search for reliable information yields nothing but a morass of commingled facts and falsehoods, people eventually stop searching. And if they stop searching, then it's no longer a problem. I don't get what you're trying to argue here. That disinformation is a threat to free speech does not mean that governments should step in to ban it. Yeah, disinformation is not a threat to free speech, because if it was, the government could step in and ban it. But they can't, because it's not. We might all agree that certain social media posts constitute disinformation. For example, messages by Russian government bots in 2016 that discourage Americans from voting. How do you even verify that? But not all disinformation is a matter of consensus. What former President Trump labeled fake news generally consisted of factual journalism that did not make him look good. Okay. But he was literally calling out disinformation. He was saying this is disinformation. It's, so are you against disinformation or not? If he's calling fake news, then he's saying it's disinformation. So you're saying him calling disinformation was disinformation? The First Amendment prevents the government from suppressing most forms of disinformation. Yes, because it's free speech. Because the Supreme Court has recognized that if permitted to regulate such speech, authorities would not be able to resist the temptation to use that power in self-serving ways to silence critics and repress dissent. Of course, tyranny, like I said. But the First Amendment doesn't apply to social media companies since it only constrains the power of government, because it was meant to constrain the government. Online platforms can, for the most part, decide whether to suppress speech, and they have. But you're arguing that they should still be allowed to do that. But with platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and Google so widely used, the place of free speech as an underpinning of society is at stake in their choices. So are you arguing to constrain free speech? Moreover, two different words in one word. Moreover, in a world powered by algorithms, speech moves differently than it did in an era of printed pamphlets and town meetings. Studies have shown that on Twitter, disinformation travels faster and further than truth. Maybe because it's interesting. Today, Twitter has policies that aim to slow that spread. The company uses crowdsourced fact-checking. Crowdsourcing is a way to check facts. How does that work? Exactly. How does that work? And how is why is this all checked, but this is separate? All right. labeling, crowdsourced tagging of misleading posts, and other approaches to cull back disinformation. You just said a whole lot of stuff that is not very clear because it's crowdsourced. That's already questionable. And you're saying it's tagging with misleading posts. So it could just be a bunch of political parties that don't like a certain set of information getting out, and they can just flag it. And that's crowdsourcing, tagging misleading posts. So they can participate in disinformation. So your control on disinformation can literally lead to disinformation. What? This is so dumb. Their methods are not perfect. Really? Huh. And there have been incidents of disinformation, including the platform's decision to remove stories about Hunter Biden's laptop that emerged right before the 2020 presidential presidential vote, which meant disinformation caused by Twitter may have had an effect on the election. The exact thing that you're arguing against is exactly what happened. That raised questions about how politics influences which posts stay and which go. Exactly, which is why crowdsourcing is stupid. And you should just allow the disinformation and free speech to happen, and then people will correct it by providing truth. Free speech. But you're saying, well, what if a lot of people only heard the lie and not the truth? Well, if the lie is something that people are not willing to believe, they'll always fact check it. If they're willing to believe a lie, then people will accept it. So it doesn't really change anything. If someone is already against you and you tell them a lie that they're willing to accept because it makes you look bad, then they'll accept it. But if someone is not against you and you tell them a lie that makes you look bad, and someone tells them a lie that makes you look bad, they'll probably question it. They'll ask questions about it. If Musk is serious about enhancing Twitter's potential as a vehicle for free speech, he should focus on how to make the platform a hospitable place for dialogue. Truth-seeking, citizens' engagement, things at the heart of why free speech matters. Do you have any ideas of how he can achieve that? Huh? Some of the steps he reportedly contemplates, including giving users more control over what they see on the platform, could help. Okay. So could improving Twitter's system for appealing the removal of tweets and disabling of accounts, clearer communications about which rules posts are found to violate and why, and greater transparency to allow researchers to study the platform and determine how the political biases may infect content moderation. But if Musk follows through on his promise to create open season for disinformation in Twitter, I don't think he would promise to create open season on disinformation. What? On Twitter, he will risk destroying free speech in one of the... This is dumb. This whole story was dumb. I regret reading it, which had never happened.